Hey there, I'm Brad Miller, and I'm with Jason Medford today, and we are walking a spiritual path with you. And today we want to talk about the ancient Sumerians. What you may say, like, where does that have anything to do with anything, right?
It has a
Um,
lot, it has a lot more to do with things than people realize.
yeah,
It's one of those civilizations that people don't know much about.
yeah. So the Sumerians were an ancient civilization in the Middle East, the Mesopotamia area. Specifically, the area was called Sumer.
Hmm.
Um, but they were before the Greeks. I mean, so that's an ancient culture. Um, a lot of things though that they did have passed down culturally. And one of those things I thought we would talk about today. So one of the probably the most famous king of Sumeria was a guy called Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is famous for us lawyers particularly, but for other people as well, because he was the first one to have a set of codified laws, and we kind of know it as the Hammurabi Code. And the basics of the code is that basically the concept of an eye for an eye, that whatever you do to someone comes back to you. So if you steal someone's goat, then something of yours would be taken in exchange for that. If you cut off someone's hand, your hand would be cut off. The kind of idea of meeting justice and punishment based on the kind of the crime. And obviously some of that has filtered down today. We look at different crimes and say, well, you committed this offense, so we're going to seek this punishment for you in exchange for that. And if you have a more severe or higher level of a crime, then that increases the punishment that you will receive. So there's still a little bit of that, but we don't do it quite as literally as they did back in Sumeria, where literally if you did something to cause your neighbor to go blind, your eyes would be popped out. We don't quite go to that extreme. Um,
Well, no, and you might think that it's like, oh, that's so, barbaric, right? But one that has still carried over is death for death,
the
right?
death
You
penalty.
you, you cause death, and there's the death penalty, right? Because you kill someone, we're going to kill you.
Hmm.
So it still does, and it's interesting, even when it may not be codified in our laws, it's definitely built into our culture
Right.
and
Yeah,
to
and
what people
that's
believe. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what wanted to talk about today because obviously not everyone who watches this is going to be a lawyer or really going to be care about, laws and that kind of stuff. Um, but I feel like we kind of went from that idea, the Hammurabi idea, the eye for an eye, and kind of over time things kind of changed, and it was less of a, I take your hand if you take mine, and more of a pun fines, things like that for penalties. You steal something, so you have to pay a fine. And we kind of moved away a little bit from that very, very hardcore one for one sort of a concept. But I've been feeling like, um, eh, over the past who knows how long, that some of this idea is starting to creep back in. That I'm seeing a lot of people talk about, they did this to me, so that should happen back to them. And it's not just in crime, it's not just in kind of justice or penalties, but there's some economic stuff along with this as well. One of the things right now that's kind of a big deal is this idea of tariffs.
Mhm.
And so a lot of talks about, well, we're going to put a tariff on them because putting a tariff on us. Or we put a tariff on them and then they come and they say, well, then we're going to come back and we're going to put an equal tariff back on you. And so it's kind of this back and forth, like you do this to me, I do this to you. And that's it's a lot of energy kind of in that direction I've been feeling recently and thought that might be something that we talk about and how that applies in kind of a spiritual sense as well.
Mhm. Well, I think it's interesting. I don't remember who said it, but something like an eye for an eye makes the world blind. You know,
Yeah,
that if we take it to an extreme, and we're the ones who are trying to exact, the judgment or punishment, then eventually everybody's going to walk around blind,
right.
right? Because we're all going to be poking each other's eyes out. And it's interesting because, like you said, so how does this relate to us spiritually, right? Because again, in our law system, in a lot of things that people feel justified, right? In things like revenge,
Yeah.
or I'm going to give them what they're due, right?
Hmm.
Because they did it to me. But yeah, how does this really kind of tie back to us spiritually, right?
Hmm.
Because I think this is one of those concepts where people could, depending on where you're looking from, really argue both sides of it. And in some ways, both sides are part of the equation in a way, but just not in the way that Hammurabi, codified it into laws.
Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of, and again, I try not to, we talked about this before, try not to get too much into the news, and try not to, get into all that because it's a lot of just toxic stuff. And a lot of it actually isn't true, the things that you hear, and people have, reasons behind the things and all that. So I try not to get that, but I still do at least find it beneficial to gauge where people's minds are. So kind of the thought that they're thinking, the way they're thinking right now in the world. And again, just to know what generally is happening in the world. If there's a big earthquake someplace and there's people suffering, that's kind of beneficial to know, because maybe that's something that we can send love to, and try to send healing to those people if that's the case. Or if there's, a big forest fire, we can send love to the forest and try to, some healing energies and things like that. And so there are some, some benefits and things. I try to limit it though, but I'm kind of picking up some of the sentiments of people kind of getting into this. You did this to me, so I'm going to do this to you. The idea that's only fair, if there's some sort of a quid pro quo here. And I know we've talked about the idea of Aini being reciprocity when it comes to giving. But it's, we also, I think, have talked about the fact that it's not a quid pro quo situation, that you don't give something to someone because you're expecting something of equal value in return. You're giving to give, and they then would give to kind of balance out, the energetic, um, kind of thing there. Um, and so it's a different concept I think people can get confused a little bit about, or maybe kind of bring that into, the things that we talk about here. Um,
Well, and it's interesting because, again, if we go back and think about some spiritual principles, if you want to call it that, right? The whole idea that's, talked about in things like the Kabbalion, and others where, there's choice and there's consequence, right? There's cause and effect, right? And so I think if people just, hold on to that, then they would say, well, eye for an eye is justified, right? Cause, effect, right? You caused somebody to be blind, so now the effect is, we're going to make you blind too, right? And so I think if people just, kind of, hold on to that maxim, then they would feel themselves justified, right, in doing it. And, again, from a law perspective, from an earthly 3D kind of perspective, yeah, we're probably justified in exacting the punishment. But what's interesting is we're not the ones who should be exacting the punishment, right? That comes from the universe anyway, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's, like you said, there's two ways that we can respond to it. Hey, you can be carnal and say, "Hey, you cut off my hand, I'm cutting your hand off." Right? And
Mhm.
okay, that's a certain vibration and frequency. Right? Or you can choose to, accept it, realize what's going on and realize that you don't have to be the one who exacts the punishment, right?
Mhm.
That instead, for whatever reason it happened, right? And the consequence will come, It's just not up to us to be the one to exact it,
Mm,
right? Because I think too, sometimes things happen to us because we're clearing karma from previous lives. And so for us to try to, be justified in retaliating, right, to that lesson or that karmic clearing that we're doing, you're only adding to more karma, right? And I think it's, sometimes it's hard to know. It's one of those things that we, don't understand unless we're trying to take a bigger, more eternal view, and we don't really have to understand either,
mm,
right? And so it's things of, I mean, I'll just tell these two stories because they pop into my mind, right? When I was growing up, there were two specific examples in our little local community where two children died of accident caused by someone else, right? And one of them was, a girl that I knew, I was friends with. We were the same year in school, and she was driving down the road, on this neighborhood where we like knew everybody in the neighborhood. And she was going back home, and one of the little neighbor kids just ran out in front of her car, right? And it was not her fault. I mean, people were outside and saw exactly what happened, and it killed this little girl, right? Who happened to be the sister of one of our friends that was our same age as well, right?
mm,
And, at that point, the family could have exacted an eye for an eye. And, I don't know legally, it'd be called involuntary manslaughter or whatever. And there could be some, fine that her parents would have to pay, and maybe it would go on her record and she'd have to go to juvie for a little while. I don't know, right? And if the family, chose to do that, think about all of the implications that that could have to this girl's life, who it was an accident. It had nothing to do with anything she did. Maybe she was a little distracted. I don't know, right? I mean, it's a teenager driving, right? But they could have exacted some sort of judgment, but instead, what did they do? They came forth with love, right? Realizing that there's some bigger reason for it. They saw this girl, as a fellow human being that they loved, and they understood more from kind of a spiritual slash religious standpoint that all of the things happen for a reason, and instead showered love over this girl, and the whole community did, right? Because again, we knew it wasn't her fault. Now, did it have an impact on this girl? Absolutely. It still did. I mean, I would guess even today, and she's my age, there's probably times when, maybe she hasn't fully let that go. It was a lesson that she was supposed to learn, right? But it's a lot easier for her to learn that lesson, when the people around her are loving and how they treated her, right? And the other example, and literally these happened probably within a year or two of each other, happened to my family, right? Where my brother
mm,
was accidentally shot and killed by his best friend, and it was the same thing, right? I mean, we could have chosen, to try to exact and blame this boy, but we didn't, right? Because again, we loved him. We knew that things were happening for a reason, right? And again, I'm not sharing these to say like, oh, my family is so great. We did it right. We do lots of things wrong, right? But there's when we're put in these situations, there's multiple choices that we can make. Choosing to love, right, is a better choice in my opinion, right? Because it's a higher vibration and frequency. It allows us to grow, right? Forgiveness is sometimes hard. It's hard to do. And that's part of our spiritual journey, right? Is forgiving, forgetting, letting go of all these things where we may feel, totally justified. And Hammurabi would say, go out and take that other eye, take that hand, whatever it might be, right? But does that serve us in our long-term spiritual involvement? No, right? It doesn't. An eye for an eye does not help you evolve and grow spiritually. Forgiving, forgetting, letting go, loving, being grateful for the experiences, however hard they may be, that's how we grow, right? But these things are put in our path in this world, right? Specifically to help us learn and grow if we
Right.
choose to do it that way. Now, the universe doesn't care. If you want to be revengeful, if you want to be hateful, if you want to be angry, hey, that's your choice, right? The universe isn't going to stop you from doing that, right? We're in a place where you have free will and choice and you can do whatever you want. But again, going back to that, law of cause and effect,
Mhm.
there will be effects of you exacting revenge and being angry and being hateful and holding a grudge, just like there will be effects if your cause instead is love and gratitude and peace, right? But again, you get to choose. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. You can do whichever one you want. And I'll tell you, sometimes, man, I've exacted revenge and anger. And other times I've done better and I have been more loving, right? But it's a game, it's a process, it's a path that we're walking,
Mhm.
and we don't always make the same choices.
Yeah. No, it made me think of the Godfather movies and kind of all the back and forth of vendettas and stuff like that. That same idea.
Well, because that's what it ends up becoming, right?
Hmm.
Is it's like if you kill somebody who killed somebody else all the time, pretty soon, like you said, there's not going to be anybody left walking this earth, right? At some point, somebody's got to say, okay, enough,
Hmm.
right? And what's interesting, in a way, is not exacting capital punishment is actually more of a punishment than exacting it, right? Because now that person has to live with it their whole life, right? And I was just watching it's actually Star Wars Andor. Been watching that series, and there was a point in that spoiler alert, where yeah, little tiny scene, but they were doing this operation, right? Rebels that were against the Empire, they were doing this operation, and so they were with some people who had never done this before. There were like two people who were kind of like the people who knew what they were doing, and then the other people were just kind of on that planet and first time they'd done it. And so those two people made it very clear. They're like, look, we're the only two that are going to carry blasters. Nobody else brings a blaster with them. Nobody else has it. We've already got this worked out. There's not going to be any violence with this, right? We're going to do it this way. Well, one of the guys on the team didn't listen, right? And brought a blaster and got into a confrontation with somebody else who wasn't, a part of it, trying to hold him back. Anyway, the blaster goes off and kills one of these two people who actually were the people that knew what's going on, right? And this is a person who was a warrior who had been through all kinds of stuff, right? Should have died many times from the missions and other things that they were on. And she dies by the hand of an errant blaster that goes off, right? So after the mission was done, they get in the vehicle and they're going away. The other person laid into the guy, right? And part of it was, she will be with you now the rest of your life. And do you know who you just killed? Right? And this is something you're going to have to live with and quit crying, right? Because I told you not to do, and I told you not to bring this. It's all on you, for doing this, but this is something you will live with for your whole life, and so it's ironic in a way, but it's also more merciful. And maybe we'll talk about justice and mercy too from an ethics
Mm.
perspective on this, because while let's say, with that in this fictitious example, right? That man will have to live with this his whole life, but it means he has his whole life to deal with it, right? He has his whole life to actually let go, forgive himself, forget, right? And move on. Allowing him that chance in this lifetime is actually a blessing and is merciful, right? If instead she pulled out her gun and said, "You killed my friend, boom, you're dead," well, now he would have to wait until the next life or whenever in the future to actually, deal with that karmic issue. And so it's kind of, and again, it's like, don't we can't use our own logic, right, to try to understand and justify all this stuff. But there's a bigger reason, and sometimes it's counterintuitive to what we may think.
Yeah. Which is a lot of what happens here on the spiritual path, is a lot of the stuff doesn't make logical sense. It goes counter to what, logic or our brains would tell us is the way things should be. Um, we've talked about um, things that you can't physically see, events or things like that that may be happening, beings and things like that that you can't actually see. Your logical brain would say, well, I can't see these beings, so they must not exist. Because if they'd exist, then I could see them, right? If there was someone right here, standing beside me, I would see them. I'd be able to touch them. I'd know they were there. And so the fact that I don't see them, I can't touch them with my hand tells me that there must not be anyone there. That's the logical whatever.
Hey,
But
hey,
you're
Brad.
laughing.
Hey, I know because I'm like, Brad, that person next to you is saying, "Quit tapping me like that," okay?
Better tapping, punching or something or um
Yeah, anyway.
yeah, but I mean but it's the same thing, but that doesn't change the fact that there are beings out there. And there may be someone standing right next to me that I can't physically 3D interact with, because of their higher frequencies, their higher levels and things like that. But that doesn't mean again that they're not there just because I can't physically touch or see them. But my mind would say, well, that can't be the case. Like, the idea of seeing is believing.
Hmm.
If it's not there, then it's not a thing. I'll believe it when I see it. Um, and it
Well,
doesn't always happen.
and that's why, again, it's like our brain would say we need to exact judgment. Judgment needs to be
S-
exacted,
Right. Something needs to happen
right?
here because they did something. They need to feel
Yep.
some sort of a consequence.
And so
Exactly.
logically, that's where we would go, right? But
Mhm.
again, it's like it's the unseen. It's the I don't understand why, but this is, the better choice. And I think because as we've been talking about this eye for an eye, it reminds me of, one of the ways that I usually kind of talk about ethics. And a lot of people when they talk about ethics, they think about right versus wrong. But ethics really is not about right versus wrong, it's about right versus right. Both choices are justified or right. So which one do you choose? Right? And a lot of times they come back to some classic ethical dilemmas, and the one that relates to what we're talking about now is justice versus mercy. Right? It's right to exact justice. You killed this person, we're going to kill you. Right? That's justice. But it's also, a choice or a right thing to exact mercy, towards that person as well. And so sometimes that's why we have these ethical dilemmas, right? Now, again, we can do whatever we want to do. We can exact justice or we can provide mercy and love, right?
Mm.
And again, it's what do you want to do? And so, well, I'll just use an example, from the Bible, right? From the Christian tradition. Well, in the Old Testament, right, Yahweh was a God of punishment,
Mhm.
and the whole law of Moses was effectively built on this eye for an eye, sort of concept, right? The Old Testament was that way. And so the Old Testament was really about justice, right? And I mean, it's prescribed in there certain things. If this person does this, here's the punishment. Kind of like what, Hammurabi had put down. Well, then enter Jesus. And what did Jesus teach? Right? Not an eye for an eye, right? But mercy and compassion. And so again, I mean, we can be justified in both. And again, I mean, each of us have to make our own decision. But, are you the kind of person that wants to be a vengeful God, like the God of the Old Testament? Or do you want to be merciful, like Jesus taught in the New Testament? You can decide. It's up to you on what you want to do. Both of those roles are important in this world. We need people who exact judgment and who sometimes we think of as harsh and maybe even put the word evil on them, right? We need those characters in this play that we're in. But we also need the people who are playing the compassionate roles. And so, again, it's up to you. Which one do you want to play? You want to be vengeful, revengeful, hateful, angry? Go ahead. Knock yourself out. Do you want to be merciful? Do you want to be compassionate? Do you want to be loving? Do you want to be grateful? Great. For me, like I said, I play in both worlds. I play in both worlds, but I choose the mercy. I choose the light. Now, sometimes do I go off in that other direction? Yeah, sometimes I do for specific reasons, right? But what do I choose most of the time? The light, the mercy, the forgiveness, the letting go, right?
Mhm.
Because for me, that's the role I'm playing here, and that's how I am evolving into something else, right? And so I think it's interesting because it does all come back to everything we're going through here has some spiritual relevance, whether people want to believe it
Mhm.
or not. But you get to choose which role you want to play because
Mhm.
nobody's going to tell you you can't. But you always have to realize that there's effects for every cause, right? And
Mhm.
so, anyway,
Mhm. No, I give with. I mean, that's a really good example. The kind of the idea of turn the other cheek is another kind of one of those ideas of someone slaps you, turn the other cheek, and instead of trying to get the revenge and all that kind of stuff, but being more compassionate, being more forgiving, and this isn't all to say that you should let everyone's transgressions against you go. That you just need to kind of, you know, um, let people do what they want with you and just kind of take it. Like that's not saying that at all. Like sometimes you need to stand up for yourself. Sometimes you need to put your down. Um, and you need to, put the fists up and say, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. You're going to stop it now. But it's that is different when you are being attacked, when you are defending yourself, when you are, um, being confronted in that way versus when you are choosing the role of judge. There are people we've elected as judges, and they are the ones that are handing down justice. Um, like you said, we can choose the role we play, but we have chosen individuals to made out this justice for us on behalf of society. And so I guess maybe a question that would come to my mind is then, is that really a role that we as individuals need to be playing? If we have those who already are supposed to be in charge of justice, then is that really our role here? Is that, you know,
Yeah, I mean, if you're living in a society that has that kind of structure, then no, in those areas, we don't need to be the one, right, who decides or exacts judgment. That's for the jury and the judge and the prosecutor to deal with, right? But it also carries over into us in our non 3D law way, right? If Brad does something, am I going to judge him for what he has done? Am I going to think differently of him? Am I going to play the role, but it's just not in a law standpoint, right?
mhm,
Am I going to judge him? Am I going to feel prejudice against him? Am I going to, do whatever? Because we're playing judge much more than we realize, right?
correct?
And that's part of the whole spiritual thing is to, let it go. And I think, the point that you brought up, because again, in the New Testament, somebody slaps you on the cheek, give them the other cheek, right?
Hmm.
Well, Jesus isn't saying go be a doormat and let people just beat up on you,
Right.
right? That's not what he's saying. And what I've always been taught is you're not even going to hit me. I'm a warrior. You're not going to slap me because I'm not going to turn the other cheek. I'm just not going to let it happen to begin with, right? I'm not going to be vulnerable and stick my cheek out here and say, "Come on, Brad, hit me, hit me, hit me, hit me," so I can turn it and I can let you hit me again, and that's going to prove what a spiritually evolved person I am. Mm-mm. No, that's not what he meant, right? It was allegorical, about forgiveness, about mercy, right? But there's absolutely nothing wrong with not allowing people to hit you to begin with, because that's what I've been taught, as well. And it's like, you're not even going to hit me. So, I guess take your best shot, but you're going to miss or something is going to happen. Because like you said, this doesn't mean that we don't have the right to protect ourselves as well.
Hmm.
It's not what it's meaning, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah. And again, this is not just about laws. This is again, I know only, not everyone out there is as lawyers, and so this is not just for us talking about, you do X to somebody or whatever. But like you said, it also impacts the way people react to you, the actions that they take against you, the way they think about you. Um, you start saying nasty rumors about somebody, chances are good they're going to become indifferent to you. They may remove themselves from your life. Um, so there are consequences in that standpoint, for doing that. But to me, kind of bigger picture is that the universe will provide consequences. That's not our role as beings here on this planet at this time to give those consequences to people. The universe will take care of it. The universe has a tally and it keeps track of everything that happens. And the law of cause and effect says that whatever happens, there's going to be an effect. And that's not necessarily for us to affect. Maybe it is. Maybe that is part of, like you said, the karmic issues that need to be worked out. Maybe there's something that we need to do to correct or rectify or to finish off some sort of a karmic situation from a previous life. But but again, we have free will. We have that choice to allow things to handle themselves essentially, and not get ourselves wet, which I know is a metaphor that we've talked about a lot.
Well, and it's interesting because, as you were saying that, it reminded me of another biblical story about Jesus. Because again, um, most people see him as a loving and compassionate and merciful being, which he is, right? But there were, a couple of examples, and I'm thinking about, like you said, where, maybe sometimes we are the effect to that person's cause. But we just need to make sure, that we kind of check in a way, that this is what we're supposed to do and that we have the right intention behind it, right? And I'll tell you why, and then I'll give you the examples. Is there's not necessarily anything wrong with us exacting the effect or being a part of the effect if our intention is right. So I have no problem holding people accountable for their actions. And if I am part of holding people accountable, I have no problem with that. Now, I will usually warn people in advance. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Because there are consequences for every choice, right? And so, depending on the choice you make, I'm going to ensure that you will have those consequences, right? Now, what intention do I have? If my intention is, again, out of hate, anger, revenge, then that's probably not the right intention for doing it, right? But if my intention is in this person's long term involvement and well being and learning of lessons, that's different, right? And, again, from stories in the Bible, we had, there's one where Jesus comes into the temple and he has a whip and he starts whipping all the money changers who are in the temple and clears out the temple. Now, what was his intention? Was it, ah ha ha ha, I'm going to be the big man? I'm going to feel strong because I'm going to go and beat up on these people? No. He was clearing the temple, right, of things that did not belong in the temple, right? And so his intention, I think, was probably pure. Even though if you were just a little birdie on the side watching it, and it's like all of a sudden this guy gets out of the temple with a whip and starts whipping people, you'd be like, "What's going on?" Right? Why is this guy so angry? Right? But I don't think he did it out of anger. I don't think he did it from a place of anger. And the same thing, there's another example where he's walking along and I think it's an olive tree that is not bearing fruit. And he effectively reaches out and kills it. Same thing. It's like, what? That's not what we would expect, right? But again, there was some bigger reason behind it, and I'm sure it was not out of anger or anything else, right? But he did it for a purpose with the right intention. And so I think sometimes we do end up playing that role, but we have to check ourselves. Why do I want to
Yeah.
do this? Is it because I'm angry? Is it because I want to get revenge? Or is it because, hey, I'm getting tapped and the universe is saying, you say this, you do that, right?
Hmm.
Because you're a part of that part of the play with the other character, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes we have a role to play like that, uh, and sometimes we don't, right? But again, we just have to be honest with ourselves and do it with the right intention and with the right energy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can be tough, especially if you are consumed with anger, or if the reasons are anger or judgment or revenge. Sometimes that those emotions can actually cloud your understanding of your true intention. You may think, "Oh, I'm just doing it because there's a lesson they need to learn." It's actually because you're angry and you need a way to release that anger, but you're using an excuse of, oh, well, it's obviously that they have a lesson, that this is in their best interest, that they get whipped by
And
me.
I'm gonna give it to them.
Right, exactly. I've got this whip in my hand. Let's make this, Um, but sometimes the anger, those emotions, or even our minds can lie to us, can lead us astray, can make us believe that our intentions are pure or they're good or they're in the best interests of the individuals, when really it's for selfish motives. It's our anger. It's because we feel, again, the idea of we need to take somebody's eye because they took ours. Um, and so that I think is one of the most difficult aspects of all of this is really knowing when it is truly the best interest that you're looking forward out for versus when it is you trying to make yourself feel better, letting out your anger, dealing with these emotions that you're holding back and things.
Mhm, mhm. Yep.
So
And it's one I'm working on every day. Every
we all
day.
are. No, I mean, we
Yeah.
all are.
Yep. Yep.
You know?
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's one reason I think while we're here is because we have lessons like this that we need to be working through. And how do we learn them? By living them, by experiencing them. That's the best way. And then ideally for some of us, teaching them or at least sharing those examples with others, of the lessons that we're taking away.
Well, and it's nothing that we need to beat ourselves up over either. Is like I said, sometimes I do things with the wrong intention. Okay. But I learn from it
Hmm.
and I'm hopeful that I'm getting better at it. Right.
Hmm.
And there's other times when I might do something or say something, and to other people, it's just like, what just happened? But it came from exactly the right place. And so, like you said, it's about our awareness, about our
Hmm.
recapitulation on what's gone on, and get better each time that we experience these things. But don't act out of emotion or out of anger or reaction, you know but stop and respond instead of just reacting, and
Hmm.
and do what we can to make sure that our intention is is good, that it's a pure intention, if you will.
Hmm.
um, and just keep getting better. But I think also it's about, uh, when th- when people do things to us, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt
Hmm.
that they're just trying and doing their best,
Hmm.
just like we're trying and doing our best. And so don't take things personally, right? Again, just see
Hmm.
that this is part of the process. But as we're more understanding is not the right word. If we're more forgiving is not the right word either, but I think you know what I mean. When things happen to us, then again, cause and effect comes back around,
Mhm.
right? And so if we're more tolerant and understanding of others, well, others will be more tolerant and understanding of us too,
Right.
right? At the end of the day.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, some days, especially when it's hard, I really hope people are understanding and tolerant. Realize that, oh, Jason must be having a bad day. Yep, I have those. Sometimes I have bad days, you
Yeah.
know. So,
Yeah. I think that's a great place then to wrap her up for today. Um,
yeah, and
so,
a good topic and a good reminder because like I said, I think especially as people feel more frustrated, right? And
mhm.
I know a lot of people do frustration, anxiety. You know, the more people feel that way, the easier it is for them to feel justified or to want to exact revenge.
Mhm.
And, you know, because there's maybe a trend of that happening, you know, it's good that we're talking about this and just, you know, check in with ourselves, you know, and kind of see how we're doing and how we can improve
Yeah.
and do better.
So with that, thank you guys for listening, and hopefully you guys understand and are tolerant of us, and as we walk through this path with you, and we'll catch everybody here on our next episode.
All right. See you, everybody.